Emily Carter had always believed she knew her grandfather, the man who taught her to ride a bike, who slipped her candy when her parents weren't looking, who died peacefully in his sleep exactly 1 year ago. But the envelope that arrived on that anniversary morning would shatter everything she thought she knew. Inside was a photograph. Her grandfather, young and smiling, standing with the woman who wasn't her grandmother, and a note in his shaky handwriting. Room 304. She's waiting. I'm sorry I never told you the truth. Forgive me, sweetheart.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The morning shift at the Grandview Hotel always started the same way. Emily would arrive at 6:30, brew the lobby coffee, check the overnight logs, and prepare for the stream of bleary-eyed guests heading to breakfast. After 3 years behind the reception desk, the routine had become almost meditative, predictable, safe, forgettable. But today was different. Today marked exactly 1 year since Grandpa Jack had passed away in his sleep, and Emily had woken up with that familiar heaviness in her chest. She debated calling in sick, spending the day wrapped in blankets with old photo albums, but she knew work would be better. Distraction was better than drowning. She was sorting through the morning mail when she saw it. A yellow envelope, creased and worn, with her name written in handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. Her heart stopped. The postmark was dated 11 months ago, and there was a series of forwarding stickers plastered across the front, tracking its journey through 3 wrong addresses before finally finding its way to her workplace. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a folded letter. The photograph was old, the colors faded to that distinctive 70s hue. Her grandfather stood in front of the Grandview Hotel, this very building, young and handsome in a way that always surprised her when she saw pictures before she was born. He was smiling, his arm around a beautiful young woman with dark hair and striking eyes. The woman wasn't her grandmother. Emily unfolded the letter, her grandfather's shaky handwriting dancing across the page. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and this letter finally found you. I've written and rewritten these words 100 times, never brave enough to send them while I was alive, but you deserve to know the truth. There's a woman named Margaret Wilson. She'll be staying at your hotel the week of my death's anniversary. Room 304. I've arranged it all. Please, talk to her. Let her tell you what I was too much of a coward to say myself. I know this must be confusing, maybe even hurtful. I'm sorry for that. But I need you to understand, some secrets aren't what they seem. Some lies protect the truth until it's safe to be told. You were always the kind one, Emily, the one who saw the best in people. I'm counting on that now. Forgive me, sweetheart. Love always, Grandpa Jack. Emily read the letter 3 times, each word carving deeper into her confusion. Room 304. She turned to her computer, pulling up the guest registry. Her breath caught. Margaret Wilson. Checked in yesterday, room 304. Scheduled to check out in 3 days. You okay? Emily jumped, quickly closing the screen. Her coworker Sandra was setting her purse down at the second terminal, eyeing Emily with concern. Yeah, fine, just tired. Sandra nodded sympathetically. Anniversary, right, of your grandfather? Emily managed a weak smile. Yeah. Take a break if you need to. I can cover. But Emily shook her head. She needed to think. Who was Margaret Wilson? Why was her grandfather's arm around her in that photograph? And why had he waited until after his death to tell her about it? The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emily processed checkouts, answered phone calls, directed guests to the breakfast buffet, all while the photograph burned in her pocket. Every time someone crossed the lobby toward the elevators, she wondered if it was her, Margaret Wilson, the woman with the answers. At 11:30, Emily's brother David showed up, carrying 2 takeout coffees. This was their tradition on difficult days. He'd take an early lunch from his construction job and sit with her during her break. "Hey, Em." David set a coffee in front of her. His weathered hands gentled despite their size. At 32, he'd already taken on the protective older brother role with a fierce dedication that sometimes felt suffocating. "How are you holding up?" Emily stared at her coffee, debating. David had idolized their grandfather. He'd named his construction company Carter & Sons in honor of Jack Carter, even though the old man had been a teacher, not a builder. The Jack Carter Memorial Scholarship Fund at the local high school had been David's idea, his way of keeping their grandfather's legacy alive. How would he react to this letter, to the suggestion that Grandpa Jack had secrets? "I got something weird in the mail today," Emily heard herself say. David leaned forward. "Weird how?" Emily pulled out the photograph and letter, sliding them across the desk. She watched her brother's face carefully, the confusion, the frown, the way his jaw tightened as he read. "This is bullshit," David said finally, his voice low and hard. "David!" "No." He pushed the letter back to her. "I don't know what this is, but Grandpa wouldn't. He loved Grandma. They were together for 45 years. This is someone trying to mess with you, probably after money or—" "It's his handwriting," Emily interrupted quietly. "And look at the photo. That's him. That's definitely him." David picked up the photograph again, his expression darkening. So what? He knew a lot of people. He was a teacher for 30 years. This could be anyone, a colleague, a student's parent. Then why would he write this letter? Why tell me to find her? "I don't know him, but I know Grandpa Jack. He was a good man, the best man I've ever known, and I'm not going to let some stranger poison his memory." David stood up abruptly. "Don't talk to this Margaret Wilson. Don't go near room 304. Just forget this, okay? For me." He left before Emily could respond, his coffee untouched on the desk. Emily sat alone in the quiet lobby, feeling the weight of the letter in her hands. David was probably right. Their grandfather had been a good man. Everyone said so. The memorial service had been packed with former students and colleagues, all sharing stories of his kindness, his patience, his integrity. But the letter was real. The photograph was real. And something in her grandfather's words, "Some secrets aren't what they seem," suggested there was more to this story than betrayal. Emily made her decision. At 6 o'clock, when her shift ended and Sandra took over the evening reception, Emily didn't go home. She stood in the elevator, her finger hovering over the button for the 3rd floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway on the 3rd floor was quiet, dimly lit by wall sconces that cast long shadows on the burgundy carpet. Emily walked slowly, counting door numbers, 298, 300, 302, until she stood in front of 304. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What would she even say? "Hello, my dead grandfather told me to find you. What was your relationship with him? Were you his mistress?" Before she could decide, the door opened. The woman standing there was in her mid-60s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a night bun. Her eyes, those striking eyes from the photograph, were the same, though lined with age now. She wore a simple navy dress and held herself with a quiet dignity that immediately put Emily on edge. "Emily," the woman said softly. It wasn't a question. "I was wondering when you'd come." "You know who I am?" "Your grandfather showed me pictures, told me stories." Margaret stepped aside. "Please, come in. We have a lot to talk about." Emily's feet moved before her brain could protest. The hotel room was neat. Suitcase on the luggage rack, reading glasses on the nightstand, a book open on the desk. Margaret gestured to the small sitting area by the window. "I'm Margaret," the woman said, settling into one of the chairs. "That I suppose you already know that." Emily remained standing, clutching her purse like a shield. "My grandfather's letter said you would explain." "Explain what, exactly?" Margaret's expression softened with something that looked like sadness. "How much did Jack tell you about his life, about before he married your grandmother?" "Enough. He grew up here, went to state college, became a teacher, met my grandmother at a church social when he was 25. They got married a year later." That's all true, Margaret said carefully, but there's more. There's always more, isn't there?
Emily's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank into the chair across from Margaret, her mind racing. Not who she thought he was? What did that even mean? "I met your grandfather 40 years ago," Margaret began, her gaze distant, as if looking back through the decades. "I was 25 years old, and I was running for my life." The story Margaret told seemed to belong to a different world, though it had happened right here in this city. She'd been married at 22 to a man named Richard Wilson, a respected attorney in town, charming and successful. At first, the marriage had seemed like a fairy tale, but within months, Richard's charm had curdled into something dark. He was controlling, then verbally abusive, then violent. "I tried to leave 3 times, Margaret said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Each time he found me. Each time it got worse. This was 1985. Domestic violence wasn't talked about the way it is now. The police would come, see his lawyer credentials, and suggest we work things out. My own family told me marriage required sacrifice." Emily listened, horrified, as Margaret described escalating abuse. Broken ribs disguised as a fall downstairs, a dislocated shoulder blamed on a car accident, psychological torture that left no visible marks. "I knew if I didn't get away, he was going to kill me. But Richard had eyes everywhere, friends in the police department, connections in every corner of this city. I couldn't just disappear. I needed help from someone he wouldn't suspect." "My grandfather," Emily whispered. Margaret nodded. "Jack had taught at the high school where I volunteered with the literacy program. We'd spoken maybe a dozen times, always professional, always brief. But I'd heard other teachers talk about him, about how he'd helped students in bad situations, how he never asked questions, just did what needed to be done." One desperate night, Margaret had shown up at the school after hours, knowing Jack often stayed late grading papers. She'd found him in his classroom, and she'd told him everything. Shown him the bruises she normally kept hidden, admitted her terror that Richard would kill her before she could escape. "I expected judgment, or worse, for him to tell me it wasn't his business," Margaret said. "Instead, he looked at me and said, 'Okay, we'll figure this out.'" What followed was a carefully orchestrated escape plan that took 3 months to execute. Jack had helped Margaret open a secret bank account, accumulating money from her part-time work that Richard didn't know about. He'd connected her with a women's shelter in another state that could provide new identity documents, a gray market service for domestic violence survivors that existed in the shadows of the law. "Jack risked everything," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "His reputation, his career, his marriage. If Richard had found out, he could have had Jack arrested for aiding my disappearance, maybe even accused him of having an affair with me to explain why he'd help. But Jack never wavered. The photograph Emily had found, the one that had sparked all of this, had been taken on Margaret's last day in this city. Jack had driven her to the bus station, but they'd stopped here, at the Grandview Hotel, for her to clean up and change clothes. He'd insisted on the photograph as proof to himself later that he'd helped her, that the risk had been worth it. "I took a bus to California that night, changed my name legally, started completely over. Your grandfather sent money periodically for the first 2 years until I was stable. We wrote letters occasionally, always careful, always vague in case Richard somehow intercepted them. Jack never asked for anything in return, never suggested his help came with strings attached." Emily's throat felt tight. "And your grandmother? Did she know?" Margaret's expression turned complicated. "Eventually, yes. Richard hired private investigators to find me. They traced the bank account, questioned people, and somehow Jack's name came up. Richard confronted your grandmother, told her Jack had been having an affair with me." Emily's heart sank. So there had been scandal.
David had been right to worry about his grandfather's reputation. Your grandmother was smarter than Richard expected, Margaret continued. She told him that was absurd. Jack had helped to volunteer from his school, nothing more. She stood by her husband publicly, even as the whispers spread through their social circles. Some people believed Richard's insinuations. Jack was passed over for a department head position because of it. Your grandmother's friends looked at her with pity. "That's awful," Emily breathed. "Yes, but here's what you need to understand. Your grandmother knew the truth. Jack told her everything that same night. And you know what she said?" Emily hesitated. She said, "Good. I'm glad you helped her, and I'm glad you're the kind of man who would." Tears pricked Emily's eyes. That sounded exactly like her grandmother. Practical, kind, unshakable in her convictions. They weathered the scandal together. It blew over eventually, as these things do. Richard never found me. I built a new life, went to law school, spent the last 30 years as a family law attorney specializing in domestic violence cases. I've helped hundreds of women escape situations like mine. "Because of what my grandfather did," Emily said slowly. "Because of what my grandfather showed me, that there are good people in the world, that asking for help isn't weakness, that sometimes the risk of action is worth taking, even when it's terrifying." Emily sat back, processing. This wasn't what she had expected. Not an affair, not betrayal, but something infinitely more complex. A good deed that carried real costs. "Why are you here now? Why this week?" Margaret's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Jack and I stayed in touch over the years. Nothing inappropriate. Birthday cards, occasional letters. When he got sick last year, he wrote to me. Asked me to come here on the anniversary of his death, to tell you this story." "But why? Why did he want me to know?" Margaret stood, walking to the window overlooking the parking lot. When she spoke again, her voice was strange, almost rehearsed. "Because he wanted you to understand that he was a complicated man, that he'd made difficult choices, that legacy isn't just about the good we do, but about the courage to act when action is needed." Something felt off. Emily couldn't put her finger on it, but Margaret's explanation felt incomplete, like a story with pages missing. "Is that all?" Emily pressed. "He sent me on this scavenger hunt just for a life lesson?" Margaret turned from the window, and, for just a moment, Emily saw something flash across her face. Uncertainty or maybe fear. "Your grandfather was a good man, Emily. Hold on to that truth." It wasn't an answer, but Emily sensed she wouldn't get more. Not tonight. She thanked Margaret and left, her mind churning. The story explained the photograph, explained the secrecy, but it didn't explain the urgency in her grandfather's letter. Some secrets aren't what they seem. Some lies protect the truth until it's safe to be told.
What truth was still hidden? Emily took the elevator down to the lobby, intending to leave, but something made her stop at the reception desk. Sander was on the phone, so Emily slipped behind the computer and pulled up Margaret Wilson's reservation. Booked 3 days ago, payment method, cash, paid in advance. Emergency contact, none. Previous stays at Grandview Hotel, none. That was odd. If Margaret had been coming here annually to honor her escape, as she'd suggested, there should be a history of stays. Emily checked back 5 years, nothing. 10 years, nothing. Margaret Wilson had never stayed at this hotel before. Emily's pulse quickened. She thought back through the conversation, replaying Margaret's words. The story had been moving, compelling, but now that Emily thought about it critically, Margaret had been vague about certain details. She'd never mentioned Richard's last name, besides Wilson, the same generic surname she used. She'd never mentioned the specific years, the name of the high school, the women's shelter organization. What if it was all a lie? No, not a lie. Parts of it felt true, but incomplete. Rearranged, maybe, or mixed with fiction. Emily pulled out her phone and did what she should have done from the beginning. She searched for Margaret Wilson, attorney, California, domestic violence. The results came back immediately. There was indeed a Margaret Wilson who fit that description, a prominent family law attorney in San Diego, specializing in domestic violence cases. But the photograph on her law firm's website showed a different woman, younger, blonde, completely unfamiliar. Emily tried different search combinations, Margaret Wilson plus Jack Carter plus teacher. Nothing relevant. Margaret Wilson plus domestic violence plus 1985. Dozens of results, none matching the woman upstairs. Her grandfather had sent her to room 304 for answers. But Margaret Wilson, whoever she really was, had given her a story that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Emily made a decision. She waited until Sandra's phone call ended, then approached the desk. "Hey, can you do me a favor? If the guest in 304 comes down or goes out, can you text me?" Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just personal thing. I'll explain later." Emily went home, but she didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, piecing together what she knew. 1, her grandfather had sent her to meet Margaret Wilson. 2, Margaret had told her a story about being rescued from an abusive marriage. But Margaret Wilson wasn't who she claimed to be. And 4, she'd never stayed at this hotel before, despite claiming to visit annually. Which meant either Margaret was lying about her identity, or she was lying about her history with Jax. Or both. But why would her grandfather send Emily to meet a liar? Unless the lie was the point. Some secrets aren't what they seem. Some lies protect the truth until it's safe to be told. Emily sat up in bed, her heart racing. What if Margaret's story wasn't about Margaret at all? What if it was about someone else, whose real identity still needed protecting? At 3 a.m., Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Guest in 304 just went out, left the hotel. Looked like she was in a hurry. Emily threw on clothes and drove back to the Grandview Hotel, her mind spinning with possibilities she was almost afraid to consider.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The hotel was quiet in the dead of night, just the night auditor dozing behind the desk and the soft hum of the heating system. Emily used her employee key card to access the third floor, her heart hammering as she approached room 304. She knew what she was about to do was wrong, a violation of guest privacy, probably a firing offense. But something in her gut screamed that time was running out, that whatever truth her grandfather wanted her to discover was slipping away. The room was empty, as Sandra had indicated. Emily slipped inside, her hands trembling. She didn't know what she was looking for. Evidence? Clues? Some indication of who Margaret Wilson really was? The room looked exactly as it had hours before. Neat, impersonal, carefully arranged. Emily searched methodically. The dresser drawers were empty except for hotel stationery. The closet held just a few outfits. The bathroom counters showed basic toiletries. It was almost too clean, too anonymous, like someone deliberately leaving no trace. Then Emily checked the room's safe. It was closed but not locked, the default state when no code had been set. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with papers. Emily pulled it out, her hands shaking. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside were documents, lots of them, legal papers mostly, covered in dense text and official stamps. The first document made Emily's breath catch, a death certificate for Richard James Wilson, dated March 15, 2019. Natural causes.
died in Riverside, California at age 67. The second document was a marriage certificate. Richard James Wilson and Helen Marie Dawson married June 12, 1983. Helen Marie Dawson, not Margaret Wilson. Emily's mind reeled. She flipped through more papers, divorce records, restraining orders, police reports, all involving Richard Wilson and Helen Dawson. The details matched Margaret's story exactly. Escalating abuse, failed escape attempts, a woman trapped in a nightmare marriage. But there was more. Emily found a newspaper clipping from April 2019, an obituary for Richard Wilson describing him as a successful attorney, beloved husband, and pillar of the community. It made no mention of his darker history. And beneath that, another article from May 2019. Local attorney Helen Dawson changes name and starts foundation for domestic violence survivors. The photograph showed a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair, Margaret Wilson. Or rather, the woman calling herself Margaret Wilson. But if Margaret was really Helen Dawson, and she'd only changed her name after Richard's death in 2019, then her entire story about escaping in 1985 with Jack's help couldn't be true. Emily's hands trembled as she continued searching through the envelope. At the bottom she found a letter, not from her grandfather, but to him. The handwriting was feminine, neat, and the date was from 6 months before Jack had died. Dear Jack, I'm writing to you because I don't know where else to turn. I've been where you know I've been. Trapped, scared, pretending everything is fine. Richard finally died last year, and I thought I'd feel free. But 36 years of abuse don't disappear with the death certificate. I've been researching, trying to find the woman you helped all those years ago. The one whose story you told me when you came to me for advice 15 years ago. The one who escaped and rebuilt her life. You said her name was Margaret, and that she'd become a lawyer who helps other women. I need to find her, Jack. I need to know it's possible, that someone like me can have a second act, that I'm not too old, too damaged, too late. I changed my name to Margaret as a tribute to her story. I know that might seem strange, but it helps me feel braver, like I'm carrying her courage with me. Please, if you know how to reach her, ask if she'd be willing to meet me. I'm staying at the hotel where you took her picture, the one you showed me, room 304, the same room you mentioned. Maybe being there will help me understand how to take the first step forward. Yours in hope, Helen. But I'm trying to think of myself as Margaret now. Emily read the letter 3 times, her worldview tilting on its axis. The woman upstairs wasn't the Margaret from the original story. She was Helen Dawson, a different woman who had survived a different nightmare, inspired by the story of the first Margaret's escape. She'd taken the name as an act of courage, a talisman against her past. And her grandfather had sent Emily to meet her, not to learn about his past, but for some other reason entirely. Emily's phone buzzed, Sandra again. Guest is back, heading to her room. Emily quickly photographed several documents with her phone, then carefully replaced everything in the safe, exactly as she had found it. She slipped out of her room and made it to the stairwell just as the elevator dinged on the 3rd floor. She sat in her car in the parking lot, her mind racing. The puzzle had more pieces than she had realized, and they weren't fitting together the way she had expected. Her grandfather had helped someone named Margaret escape an abusive marriage in 1985. That story was true. Margaret had confirmed it, and it explained the photograph, the whispers that had damaged his reputation. But Helen Dawson had found out about that story 15 years ago, when she'd sought Jack's advice about her own abusive marriage. He'd told her about Margaret as inspiration, shown her the photograph, given her hope. But he hadn't helped Helen escape, perhaps because she hadn't been ready, or because the circumstances were different, or because Richard's connections made it too dangerous. Helen had stayed in her marriage for 15 more years, until Richard's death had finally freed her. Now she'd come to the hotel, trying to connect with that original Margaret, trying to find the courage to build a new life. And Jack had sent Emily to, what? Meet her? Help her? But why?
Emily's phone rang, startling her. David's name flashed on the screen. "It's almost 4 in the morning. Why are you awake?" "I could ask you the same thing. I drove past the hotel and saw your car. You went to see her, didn't you? After I told you not to." "David, I looked her up, Em. Margaret Wilson, or rather, Helen Dawson. She changed her name 6 years ago, right after her husband died. Did she tell you that? Or did she feed you some story about Grandpa helping her?" Emily's stomach dropped. "You investigated her?" "Of course I did. You think I'd let some stranger mess with my family without checking? I found the marriage records, the name change, all of it. This woman is using Grandpa's memory for something. Maybe she's after money, or maybe she's just crazy, but she's not lying. Not exactly. It's more complicated than that." She explained what she had found, the letters, the original Margaret, the way Helen had taken the name as inspiration. David listened in silence, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment.
"So, let me get this straight," he said finally. "Grandpa helped some woman named Margaret 40 years ago. Then 15 years ago, a different woman, Helen, came to him about her abusive marriage, and he told her Margaret's story. But he didn't actually help Helen. And now Helen is pretending to be Margaret, and Grandpa sent you to meet her for what reason?" Put that way, it did sound absurd. "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but there's something we're missing. Some reason he wanted me specifically to meet her, and some reason it had to wait until after he died." "Or," David said, his voice hard, "this Helen woman knew Grandpa was dying and saw an opportunity. Maybe she came to him, spun this story about taking Margaret's name, and he was too sick or too medicated to realize she was manipulating him. Maybe she convinced him to write that letter, set up this meeting as part of some scam. That doesn't feel right, doesn't it? Think about it, Em. You're the soft touch in the family, the one who volunteers at the soup kitchen, who gives money to every sob story. If someone wanted to exploit Grandpa's legacy, you'd be the perfect target." Emily wanted to argue, but doubt crept in. She'd only met Helen once. She didn't really know this woman. And David was right. Emily did have a tendency to believe the best in people, sometimes to her detriment. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "Stay away from her. Don't engage. When she checks out tomorrow, let her leave. Forget this whole thing happened." "And the letter? The photograph? We just ignore what Grandpa wanted?" "Grandpa was dying, Em. People say and do strange things at the end. It doesn't mean we have to follow through on every last wish, especially when it might hurt us." After David hung up, Emily sat in her car, watching the hotel windows. One room on the 3rd floor glowed with light. 304. She thought about Helen Dawson up there, a woman who'd survived 36 years of abuse and was now trying to figure out who she was without that identity of victim. She thought about the original Margaret, whoever she was, who'd built a new life with her grandfather's help. She thought about her grandmother, who had stood by her husband even when scandal threatened to destroy them. And she thought about her grandfather's letter. Some secrets aren't what they seem. Some lies protect the truth until it's safe to be told. What truth was still hiding? Emily pulled out her phone and did something she probably shouldn't have. She texted the number on her registration. "This is Emily Carter, Jack's granddaughter. I know you're not the original Margaret. We need to talk." The response came within seconds. "Come back to 304 and come alone. This time I'll tell you the real story." Emily sat in the parking lot, staring at that message, her instincts warring with each other. David's warnings echoed in her mind, but so did her grandfather's words. "You were always the kind one, Emily, the one who saw the best in people. I'm counting on that now." She went back inside.
Helen Dawson. Emily couldn't think of her as Margaret anymore. Opened the door before Emily could knock. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but her expression held a strange mixture of relief and resignation. "You searched my room," Helen said. "It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, you should have. Your grandfather knew you would." Helen stepped aside. "That's why he sent you to me.
Emily entered cautiously, her phone in her pocket with 911 already dialed, her finger hovering over the call button. She'd left a text for David with Helen's room number, just in case. But standing there, looking at this tired woman in her hotel bathrobe, Emily felt her fear ebbing. "I lied to you earlier," Helen said, settling into the chair by the window. "Not about everything, but about the important parts." "Why?" "Because I was testing you. Your grandfather asked me to." She pulled a folded paper from her robe pocket, another letter in Jack's handwriting. "He gave me this before he died, told me to read it only after I'd met you, after I'd told you the sanitized version of the story." She handed the letter to Emily. It was addressed to Helen, dated 2 weeks before Jack had died. "Dear Helen, by the time you read this, you'll have met my granddaughter Emily. I hope she impressed you. I hope you saw in her what I've always seen. A deep capacity for compassion, yes, but also a stubborn determination to find the truth. I couldn't tell Emily everything myself. Some truths are too painful to hear from someone you love. They need to come from a stranger so the hurt can be processed without the complication of grief and loss. Tell her about Margaret, the real story, not the version I've told others. Emily needs to know what her grandmother sacrificed, what I asked her to sacrifice. And then, if Emily is who I believe she is, she'll understand why I need her to help me finish what we started 40 years ago." Emily's hand shook. "I don't understand. What did my grandmother sacrifice?" Helen met her eyes. "Your grandfather didn't help Margaret escape from an abusive husband. Margaret was never in an abusive marriage." The room seemed to tilt. "But you said—" "I told you the story your grandfather told everyone. The story he created to protect Margaret, to protect your grandmother." Helen took a deep breath. "Margaret was pregnant." The words hung in the air like smoke. In 1985, Margaret was a 25-year-old graduate student, unmarried, from a strict religious family. She'd gotten pregnant by a man who'd already left town, who wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. Her family was pressuring her to give the baby up for adoption, or worse. "Oh God," Emily whispered. This was in 1985, Emily. In certain circles, in certain families, there were still illegal abortion clinics, dangerous procedures. Margaret's father was threatening to take her to one of these places, said he'd rather she risk dying than bring shame on the family by having a bastard child. Margaret came to your grandfather because she'd heard he helped students in trouble. She was desperate. She wanted to keep her baby, but she had no money, no support, nowhere to go. She'd already been kicked out of her apartment when her landlord found out she was pregnant. She was living in her car. Helen's voice was steady now, telling a story she'd clearly rehearsed. Your grandfather wanted to help, but it wasn't simple. If he just gave her money or helped her find housing, questions would be asked. People would wonder why a married male teacher was so invested in helping a pregnant young woman. The rumors would destroy both of them. So he created a different story, Emily said slowly, understanding dawning. The abusive husband, the brave escape. He made Margaret into a sympathetic figure instead of a shameful one. And to make it believable, he took risks. He was seen with her. He openly helped her. He made sure people knew he was involved. When suspicions arose about their relationship, your grandmother publicly defended him, said he was just being charitable. But people thought he was having an affair anyway. Yes, but an affair was better than the truth. An affair could be denied and eventually people would move on. But if anyone had known he was helping an unmarried pregnant woman hide from her family, if anyone had discovered he'd helped her establish a new identity specifically to keep a baby her family wanted aborted, your grandfather could have faced criminal charges. Kidnapping maybe, conspiracy, and Margaret's family had money and connections. They would have destroyed him. Emily's mind was reeling. What happened to Margaret? To the baby? Your grandfather helped her to get to California, just like I told you before.
She did change her name. That part was true. She had the baby, a girl, raised her alone, eventually went to law school. She did become a family law attorney, specializing in helping women in difficult situations. She just wasn't helping them escape abusive husbands. She was helping them navigate custody battles, adoption issues, reproductive rights cases. And my grandmother knew all of this? Helen's expression softened with something like admiration. Your grandmother orchestrated half of it. She was the one who found the women's shelter in California that would take Margaret. She was the one who set up the fake paper trail about the abusive husband, got a friend to pose as a witness, created fake police reports that went nowhere. She protected your grandfather's involvement by taking on the risk herself. Emily thought of her grandmother, practical, quietly strong, always working behind the scenes. It fit. God, it fit perfectly. But that still doesn't explain you, your connection to all this. Helen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Margaret's baby, the girl she had in 1985, is my daughter. The world stopped. Your what? My daughter, Jessica. She's 40 years old now, married, successful, happy. She never knew her mother struggled to keep her. Margaret told Jessica she was the product of a college relationship that didn't work out. Nothing traumatic, just young love that faded. And that was true enough. But what does that have to do with your grandfather sending you to me? Helen stood, moving to her suitcase. She pulled out another photograph, recent, showing a young woman with warm eyes and a bright smile standing next to Helen. Jessica started having her own fertility struggles 5 years ago, multiple miscarriages. The doctors ran genetic tests and discovered she was adopted. The records were sealed, but she had the right to know her medical history, so the state opened Margaret's original birth records. Emily's stomach tightened, sensing where this was going.
Jessica found Margaret 2 years ago. They'd been rebuilding a relationship. It's been beautiful, actually. Margaret got to meet her grandchildren. Jessica got answers about where she came from. But then Jessica started asking questions about her biological father. Margaret had always said she didn't know who he was, just a brief fling. But the genetic test showed something that didn't make sense. Helen pulled out a medical report, covered in genetic markers and percentages Emily didn't understand. Jessica's ancestry test showed she had significant matches to people in this area, second and third cousins she'd never heard of. When she dug into the family trees, all the lines led back to one common ancestral family. Helen looked at Emily, her eyes filling with tears. The Carter family. Emily's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. No, that's not possible. My grandfather wouldn't. Your grandfather didn't, Helen said quickly. I promise you, Emily, Jack was never unfaithful to your grandmother. The genetic connection isn't through him. Then who? Helen handed her another document, a family tree, meticulously researched with names and dates going back generations. Your grandfather had a younger brother, Thomas Carter. He died in a car accident in 1987, 2 years after Margaret left town. Emily remembered Uncle Tommy from old family photos and occasional mentions. He died before she was born, a tragedy the family rarely discussed in detail. Her grandfather had kept a picture of Tommy on his dresser until the day he died. Tommy was 23 in 1985, charming, impulsive, not ready to settle down. He and Margaret had a brief relationship, a few weeks, nothing serious. When Margaret found out she was pregnant, Tommy had already left town for a job in another state. She tried to reach him, but he'd moved on, changed his number. By the time she found him, she'd already decided she didn't want him involved. He was too young, too unreliable. She told him to forget about her. And he did? He tried to, but he told Jack, confessed the whole thing, said he'd messed up, asked what he should do. Jack met with Margaret and they made an agreement. Tommy would stay away, let Margaret raise the baby without interference. In exchange, Jack would make sure Margaret and the baby were safe and provided for. Emily's throat was tight. So my grandfather risked everything, his reputation, his career, his marriage, to protect his brother's child? And to honor Margaret's choice. She didn't want Tommy in the picture. She didn't want her family's money or influence. She wanted autonomy, the right to raise her child on her own terms. Your grandfather respected that, even though it cost him dearly. The pieces were finally clicking into place. Emily thought about the year 1987, the year Uncle Tommy had died in that car accident. She'd always been told it was sudden, unexpected, a tragedy that the family rarely discussed in detail. Her grandfather had kept a picture of Tommy on his dresser until the day he died. Tommy was 23 in 1985, charming, impulsive, not ready to settle down. He and Margaret had a brief relationship, a few weeks, nothing serious. When Margaret found out she was pregnant, Tommy had already left town for a job in another state. She tried to reach him, but he'd moved on, changed his number. By the time she found him, she'd already decided she didn't want him involved. He was too young, too unreliable. She told him to forget about her. And he did? He tried to, but he told Jack, confessed the whole thing, said he'd messed up, asked what he should do. Jack met with Margaret and they made an agreement. Tommy would stay away, let Margaret raise the baby without interference. In exchange, Jack would make sure Margaret and the baby were safe and provided for. Emily's throat was tight. So my grandfather lived with all of this, the scandal, the rumors, the professional consequences, and he never told anyone the truth because it would have exposed Tommy? And after Tommy died, he couldn't tell because it would have destroyed Tommy's memory. And it would have raised questions about Jessica, questions that might have led Margaret's family to the child they'd wanted aborted. Your grandmother agreed. They kept the secret for 40 years. But my grandmother died 3 years ago, Emily said. Why didn't he tell us then? Because Jessica didn't know, and Margaret felt she deserved to live her life without that shadow. But then Jessica did the genetic test, and everything started unraveling. Margaret reached out to Jack last year, told him what Jessica had discovered. They decided together that the truth should finally come out, but gently, with context, with care. Helen pulled out one final letter, this one addressed to Emily, in her grandfather's handwriting. He gave this to Margaret to give to you, but Margaret's health has been declining, early-stage Alzheimer's. She sent me instead, because she trusts me and because I knew I could tell the story without the emotional weight of being directly involved. Emily took the letter with shaking hands. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, you know the truth now. You know that your grandfather fathered a child, that I helped protect both mother and baby, and that this secret has shaped my entire adult life. I'm telling you this now because Jessica, your cousin, wants to meet her father's family. She deserves to know her heritage, to understand where she comes from. But I didn't want to burden your father or David with this knowledge. They idolized Tommy, and I couldn't bear to complicate their grief with this complicated truth. But you, Emily, you've always had the biggest heart. You see people's humanity even when they make mistakes. You understand that life is messy and complex, that good people sometimes do questionable things for the right reasons. Jessica is a wonderful woman. She has a family, a career, a full life. She doesn't need anything from the Carters except acknowledgement, recognition, a place at the table if we're willing to make room. I'm asking you to be the bridge, to meet Jessica, to decide if and how to tell your father and David, to help integrate her into the family if you think that's possible, or to simply know her yourself if that's what feels right. I know this is a heavy burden, but I trust you, sweetheart. You were always the one who understood that families are built on more than blood. They're built on choice, on compassion, on the willingness to expand our circles to include the people who need belonging. Whatever you decide, know that I love you, and I'm sorry for the weight of this secret. Love always, Grandpa Jack. Emily read the letter twice, tears blurring the words. She thought about Jessica, a 40-year-old woman who just discovered she had an entire extended family she'd never known. She thought about her father and David, who remembered Uncle Tommy as a fun-loving jokester who died too young. She thought about her grandmother, who'd sacrificed her own reputation to protect a graduate student she'd never met. "Where is Jessica now?" Emily asked. Helen smiled, pulling out her phone.
She's at a hotel across town. She wanted to be nearby in case you agreed to meet her, but she didn't want to pressure you. She knows this is overwhelming. And Margaret, the original Margaret? In a memory care facility in San Diego. She has good days and bad days, but she wanted me to tell you that she thinks about Jack every day. That what he did for her changed the trajectory of her entire life. That she's sorry the secret caused him pain, but grateful beyond words for his courage. Emily stood, moving to the window. The sky was beginning to lighten, dawn approaching after the longest night of her life. Down in the parking lot, she could see her car, and beyond it the city, where her grandfather lived his entire life, carrying secrets that would have crushed a weaker man. I need time, Emily said finally, to process this, to figure out how to move forward. Of course, Jessica isn't going anywhere, and neither am I, until you're ready. Emily turned to face her. Why you? Why did Margaret send you specifically? Helen's smile was sad. Because 15 years ago, when I came to Jack about my own situation, he told me Margaret's story. He said that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help, and the most courageous thing we can offer is truth, even when it costs us. That conversation saved my life, Emily. It gave me hope when I had none. And when Margaret needed someone to tell this story, someone who understood the weight of secrets and the power of finally speaking truth, she thought of me. Emily left the hotel as the sun rose, her mind spinning with revelations. But as she drove home, her phone buzzed with the message that would shatter everything she thought she'd finally understood. This is Emily. I need to meet you today. There's one more thing about your grandfather, something even Helen doesn't know, something I found in his papers. Please, it's urgent.
Emily sat in the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched, waiting. She'd texted back immediately, agreeing to meet. After everything she'd learned in the past 24 hours, what was one more revelation? Jessica arrived right on time, a woman who looked exactly like the photograph Helen had shown her, but more real, more present. She had Uncle Tommy's eyes, Emily realized with a start, the same blue-gray color that appeared in old family photos. "Thank you for meeting me," Jessica said, sliding into the booth across from Emily. "I know this must be overwhelming." "That's an understatement." Emily managed a weak smile. "Helen told me everything. About your mother, about Tommy, about what my grandfather did." "Not everything," Jessica said quietly. She pulled a folder from her bag, the kind lawyers use, stuffed with papers. "When my mother's Alzheimer's started getting worse, I became her medical and legal proxy. I've been sorting through her files, organizing her affairs, and I found something that changes the entire story." Emily's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" Jessica opened the folder, pulling out a stack of letters, old, yellowed, tied with string. "Correspondence between my mother and your grandfather, spanning from 1985 to 2019. Over 300 letters." "I don't understand. Helen said they kept in touch occasionally." "They wrote to each other every month for 34 years. Long, detailed letters, and they're not what you'd expect from a man who helped a stranger out of obligation to his brother." She slid several letters across the table. Emily picked up the first one, dated July 1985, in her grandfather's handwriting. "Dear Margaret, your letter arrived today, and I must have read it a dozen times. Knowing that you and the baby are safe, healthy, settling into your new life, it's the only thing that makes the whispers and sideways glances bearable. I need you to understand something. What I did, what we did, wasn't just about Tommy or about saving a child from a terrible situation. It was about you, your courage, your determination to choose your own path despite everyone trying to control you. You remind me of Eleanor, Emily's grandmother, though she'd laugh if I told her that. You both have this fierce independence, this refusal to let others define who you are. Tommy asked me yesterday why I'm willing to sacrifice so much for his mistake. I told him it wasn't a mistake. You weren't a mistake. The baby isn't a mistake. Sometimes life presents us with choices that seem impossible, and the people who stand up and make those choices anyway, on their own terms, are the bravest people I know. Stay strong. Write soon. Jack." Emily's hands trembled as she read. This wasn't the tone of an uncle fulfilling a familial obligation. This was something else entirely. She picked up another letter, this one from Margaret, dated November 1987.
Dear Jack, I heard about Tommy. Eleanor called me. Yes, she has my number. She insisted when I left, said someone needed to be able to reach me if you ever needed help. She told me about the accident, about how you're blaming yourself. Please don't. Tommy made his own choices, just like I made mine. You can't carry guilt for every person who stumbles under the weight of their own decisions. You did everything you could. You protected me. You protected Jessica. You tried to protect Tommy from himself. Eleanor said you're not sleeping, not eating. Jack, you have to take care of yourself. Jessica needs you in this world. I need you in this world. You're the first person who ever saw me as something more than a problem to be solved or a mistake to be fixed. Don't let Tommy's death steal that from us. With love, Margaret. Emily looked up at Jessica, her mind racing. They were in love. I think so, Jessica said softly. Not an affair, nothing physical, nothing that crossed the lines of his marriage, but an emotional connection that lasted decades. My mother kept every letter, and from what I can tell, your grandfather did the same until near the end when he started destroying evidence, probably trying to protect everyone after he died. But my grandmother, she knew about the letters? Jessica pulled out another document, this one more recent, dated just 2 years ago. It was typed with a scanned signature at the bottom, Eleanor Carter. To whom it may concern. My husband Jack and I have been married for 43 years. In that time, he has been faithful to me in every way that matters. He has never physically betrayed our vows, never lied to me, never made me doubt his commitment to our family. But I would be lying if I said he gave me all of his heart. A piece of it, a significant piece, has always belonged to a woman named Margaret, whom he helped in 1985 and corresponded with for the rest of his life. I made my peace with this long ago. Jack loved me. I never doubted that. But he loved Margaret differently, in a way that complemented rather than competed with what we had. She represented something to him, possibility, perhaps, or a road not taken, or simply a connection that transcended the ordinary patterns of his life. I'm writing this to ensure that after my death, when Jack inevitably tries to erase evidence of their connection to protect my memory, someone knows the truth. I was never a victim in this story. I chose to stay married to a man whose heart was divided, because the part of him I had was enough, more than enough. Margaret and Jack saved each other in ways I could never fully understand, and I'm grateful to her, truly, for being the person he could be completely honest with, even about the things he couldn't share with me. If you're reading this, you're probably Emily, Jack's granddaughter, the one he trusted most. Please don't judge him or me or Margaret too harshly. We all did the best we could with an impossible situation. With love, Eleanor Carter. Emily felt tears streaming down her face. She knew everything, and she still loved him, Jessica finished, and he still loved her. My mother has early Alzheimer's, but she remembers Jack with perfect clarity. She says he was the great love of her life, even though they never were together, even though they made the choice, separately and together, not to pursue what they felt because of Eleanor, because of Tommy's memory, because of all the complications. Why are you telling me this? Why not just let the sanitized version stand? Jessica leaned forward, her expression intense. Because your grandfather spent his last months writing letters, not just to you, but to my mother, to Helen, to several other people. And in every single one, he said the same thing. He wanted his family to understand that love isn't simple, that sometimes the most moral choice is the one that looks questionable from the outside, that sacrifice and desire can coexist, that you can be faithful and still yearn for something else. She pulled out one final letter, this one addressed to Emily, but different from the one that Helen had given her.
Emily, if Jessica is showing you this letter, it means she found the correspondence I tried to destroy. I'm not sorry she did. I'm actually relieved. The sanitized version of the story is true, but incomplete. I loved your grandmother with everything I had, and I loved Margaret with everything I didn't know I had until I met her. These loves were different. One was partnership, history, shared life. The other was possibility, inspiration, a kind of recognition I'd never experienced before. I never touched Margaret after that photograph. I never saw her in person after she left in 1985. But we shared something through those letters that was as real as any physical relationship. maybe more real, because it existed purely in the realm of honesty, without the complications of daily life wearing it down. Your grandmother knew. She read some of the letters early on, and we talked about it. She decided she could live with Margaret existing in this separate space in my heart, as long as I remained present and devoted to our life together. And I was. God, I tried to be. But I can't die with you thinking I was simply a good man who helped people. I was complicated. I yearned. I fantasized about alternate lives. I wrote love letters to a woman who wasn't my wife for 34 years. And somehow, impossibly, this didn't make me a bad husband. Eleanor would tell you that herself if she were still here. Our marriage was strong. Stronger, perhaps, because we were honest about its limitations. I'm telling you this because I see you settling, Emily. Taking the safe job, dating the convenient guy, building a small life because you're afraid of wanting more. I've watched you shrink yourself for 3 years, telling yourself that contentment is enough. Don't do what I did. Don't divide your heart because you're too afraid to choose. If you want more, want passion, want risk, want a life that feels too big for the box you're in, go get it. Don't spend decades writing letters to the life you wish you had. Or, if you do make the choice I made to stay in the safe, committed relationship while yearning for something else, do it consciously, with your eyes open, with full knowledge of what you're gaining and what you're sacrificing. But don't sleepwalk through your life, sweetheart. That's the tragedy. Love, Grandpa Jack. Emily sat back, overwhelmed. The past 24 hours had deconstructed everything she thought she knew about her grandfather. The perfect marriage she'd idealized, the simple narrative of a good man helping people, the clean story of sacrifice and duty. The truth was messier. Her grandfather had been faithful and yearning, devoted and divided, honorable and desperately in love with someone he could never fully have. He'd lived in the tension between obligation and desire for his entire adult life. And her grandmother knew, had chosen to stay anyway, had built a life that was real and meaningful despite, or maybe because, of its complications. "What do I do with this?" Emily asked Jessica. "Do I tell my dad? David, do we rewrite the family history to include you but keep the rest secret? Do we tell everything and let people draw their own conclusions?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Emily thought about her life, the front desk job that paid the bills but left her hollow, the boyfriend who was nice but uninspiring, the careful, small existence she'd constructed to avoid risk. She thought about her grandfather's words, "Don't sleepwalk through your life." "I want to do what scares me," Emily said slowly. "I want to choose the complicated truth over the comfortable lie, but I don't know if I'm brave enough." "Your grandfather thought you were," Jessica said. "That's why he left all of this for you to discover. Not as a burden, but as permission." "Permission for what?" "To be messy. To want things that don't fit the narrative people expect. To build a life that makes sense to you, even if it looks strange from the outside." Jessica smiled. "He gave you a map through the complexity. Now you get to decide what to do with it."
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.